Chapter 2. Alice's point of view. Jasper and I were sitting by a pond. My back was against the base of a tree and he was right beside me. Our hands were linked and he had a small smile on his face. I had never seen him smile in my visions, and this made me feel good that he was smiling now and I got to see it. Well, you know a lot about me. Well, all that I know that I can tell you. I want to know what your past was like, I said to him. I then felt him tense up and go rigid beside me. You don't have to, if you don't want to, I told him.
No, it's fine, and anyways it is only fair.
He said as he looked down at me.
I was born in Texas in 1843 and joined the Confederate States Army in 1861 to serve in the Civil War. I was 17, about to turn 18 when I joined. Due to my charismatic personality, I ascended through the ranks quickly. I was the youngest soldier in such high ranks.
He said. He looked as if he was deep in thought. He gazed up at the trees and sighed heavily and then turned his gaze to me.
I was turned into a vampire in 1863 by a vampire named Maria when I was 20 years old. She had two companions named Lucy and Nettie that were with her when she found me. As a vampire, I gained the ability to sense and manipulate the emotions of those around me. Recognizing my high rank in the army, Maria decided to change me into a vampire to help her claim territory in Monterey. My responsibility was to train young vampires. After about 40 years of this, I grew weary of the lifestyle and joined an old friend, Peter, and his mate Charlotte. I left the two eventually, not wanting to feed on humans because I could feel the prey's emotions as they died.
He finished and looked down at the ground. When I knew he was finished speaking, I spoke up. I wish I was able to remember everything from my human life, I murmured as I looked down at our linked hands. I would be able to tell you so much more about me, I added.
You're lucky. I wish I couldn't remember my past life. I stay at the same age forever while I see my family slowly die off and I can't do anything about it.
He whispered. But you know who your family was. You have the good memories that you had together and you get to remember those special moments, I told him. I have nothing to start with. I wish I knew who they were. I sighed as I looked off about 300 yards into the distance.
Do you know how old you are?
He asked me suddenly. 19, I answered him with confidence.
How do you know that?
He asked me. When I had come out of my trance, there was a note in my left hand. I still have it now. I keep it just in case I find out something about my human life that would lead me to the letter that was left for me. Would you like to read it? I asked him as I pulled it out of my coat pocket. He nodded and I handed it to him. He unfolded the gentle paper and held it with both hands and started to read it aloud.
Alice, I am so sorry that I did this to you. I had no other choice. I cannot tell you why I had to do it because the reason is too dangerous for you to know and I don't need you searching for the answers. You must understand that I did this for your own good and I had to keep you safe somehow and I felt that this was the only way for me to do so. Also, I am sorry for not being able to be here when you wake up from your transformation. I hope that you will forgive me. I can only give you this information. Your name is Alice and you are 19 years old. You were born in 1901. The date that I changed you was March 3, 1920. I can't give you any more information and I am sorry for that too. Be safe.
He finished reading the note and handed it back to me.
They really didn't want you to know who you were. And it sounds like they knew that you would lose your memory of being human.
He stated as he looked at me with apology in his eyes. But why would they do that? I asked somewhat to myself.
Maybe they were trying to protect you from something.
He said quietly as he was once again deep in thought. I sighed. The rain was starting to pick up and I could now see that it was wetting my clothes. I stood up and pulled him up with me. I need to go get my stuff from the hotel that I am staying at. You don't have to come if you don't want to, I told him. I didn't want to scare him away or make him feel uncomfortable.
I don't mind.
He informed me politely. We walked back to the city and I led him to a 3-story hotel. We walked inside and I led him down a hall and stopped at a door in the middle of the hall. I opened the door and he followed me inside. After I closed the door behind us, I went into the back room. I heard Jasper lean against the wall as I rummaged around in my small backpack and grabbed my other small tote bag. I finally pulled out a key card and a credit card that I'd seen would be there. Once again I put on my small backpack and grabbed my tote bag. I looked at Jasper and headed to the door once again. "Are you ready?" I asked him.
Yes, Mom.
He answered as he grabbed the door for me. I couldn't help but smile as I went back out into the hall again. We went to the front desk and I checked out. The man behind the desk was gaping at me for the longest time before he actually checked me out of the room. He was probably surprised that I was leaving. I handed him the card and in a minute he handed it back to me. "You have a nice day," he said as we walked away from the counter and out the double doors of the hotel.
Where are we going?
Jasper asked me, and that made me stop in my tracks. I really had no idea where we were going. I had never planned out what would happen once I found him and he had decided to come with me. "I really don't know," I admitted as I stared up at him. "I had never thought about what I would do when I found you," I admitted honestly. He nodded and turned so he was facing me.
"I really don't care where we go,"
he said to me. This made me smile because I felt like he was going to be with me wherever I went. I nodded and laced my hand into his and walked on until I was pulled away into a vision. Jasper and I checked into a hotel as the sun came out. It looked like it was still in Philadelphia. Then I looked around and it was in the same area that we were in now. The sun stayed out for the rest of the day and we checked out the next morning. I came out of the vision and felt a set of arms wrapped around me securely. I looked up to see Jasper looking down at me worriedly. I got to my feet again and took his hand again. I looked up at the sky and the clouds were starting to thin and the rain had completely stopped. "Vision," I told him as he released his grip on me. "The sun is about to come out," I told him and he nodded in understanding.
"Well, where do you want to go then?"
he asked me. "Well, I saw us checking into a hotel for the rest of the day. It looked like that place right there," I replied as I pointed to a hotel across the street from us. He nodded and we walked across the street and through the doors. We walked up to the counter and waited for about 13 seconds for one of the workers to show up. A lady with light blonde hair and blue eyes came up and assisted us. "Hello," she said kindly as she looked at the two of us. She looked at me and then gaped at Jasper for what seemed like forever. "What can I do for you?" she asked, but I think the question was directed more to him than to the both of us. I spoke up then. "We would like a room please," I answered her. She peeked in my direction and then turned back to Jasper and nodded. I sighed in frustration and was about to pull out my credit card when Jasper reached into his pocket and got out his wallet. He pulled out a credit card like mine except his was platinum and handed it to the lady behind the counter. She took it easily and stared at him once more. She turned away and fumbled with some papers and that is when I smelt it. The girl yanked her hand back and sucked on her finger. There was blood on the sheet of paper that was just in her hand. "Shit," she muttered and then turned around to look at us again. "Hold your breath," I told Jasper behind clenched teeth. He had already smelt it though. His eyes had turned black and he was clutching at the counter with so much force that it would soon break in his grasp. The girl then turned around once more to go get a room key. I turned to Jasper and took his hand and held it tightly. He started to shift and a low growl was coming from his throat. I didn't know how I was going to stop this from happening, so I took his other hand and turned him so he was looking at me. "Look at me, Jasper," I said. He turned his gaze to me and I could see the pain in his eyes. He didn't want for this to happen, but it was taking over him. "Just hold your breath and we will be out of here soon, I promise," I whispered to him. The girl then returned with the key and his card. I quickly grabbed them both. "Thank you," I said to her kind of in a rude tone and turned pulling Jasper with me. Once we turned to corner there was a door that led to outside and I went in that direction. I opened the door and that is when Jasper relaxed. He took a deep breath of the fresh air and then nodded towards me. We walked back inside and opened the door to our room. I shut the door behind us and turned to him. "I am so sorry," I whispered to him. "I should have seen that this was going to happen. I should have known," I sighed. He sat down on the couch and I sat down next to him.
This isn't your fault. I should have better control when a thing like this happens.
He replied. I crossed my legs on the couch and turned so I was facing him.
How do you do it?
He asked.
Isn't it hard to just live off of animal blood?
He asked me as he looked at his hands. I took his hand and he looked up to me. It's not without practice. I used to slip up all the time when I first started, but I got used to it. You will too. It will take time just like it did for me. It's not easy at first, but I am here for you. And, I always will be, I murmured to him.
What if it never does?
He asked. It will, and you need to have more confidence in yourself if you are going to do it, I reminded him gently.
You said that you had seen us with a family. Can you tell me about them?
He asked me, trying to change the subject. The Cullens. They are very nice and will welcome us when we meet them. Carlisle is the head of the family. He takes charge of what goes on. He is a very nice person. He has blonde hair and is about 6 feet tall. He is about 250 years old. He used to be with the Volturi, but left because he didn't like that they killed so often. It's really cool too. He works at a hospital and has no problem with the smell. His wife Esme, she has a dark red hair color and is about 5'6". She killed herself when her baby had died and Carlisle had found her and changed her. They soon married each other. I spoke softly. Edward is their first adopted son. He is older than Esme in vampire years, but he is originally 17 years old. He was born in the same year I was but suffered from Spanish influenza in 1918. Carlisle was his doctor and was in his mother's room. She was dying from the sickness and she knew that he could save her son. She begged him to keep him from dying and Carlisle thought that this would be a good opportunity so he would not have to live alone. He entered Edward's hospital room and saw that he was dying from it as well. Carlisle thought that he was already dead but decided to give it a shot. He took him away from the hospital and 3 days later Edward was one of us. They lived with each other for 10 years and then he left because he didn't like living that way. He returned 10 years later to Carlisle and Esme. They haven't split up since then. Edward doesn't have a mate though, and this makes him unhappy and somewhat angry with himself, although he doesn't want to admit it. I continued on with a sad smile planted on my face. Rosalie and Emmett were the last to join the family. Rosalie had been raped and badly hurt and her fiancé had left her in the street to die. Carlisle smelt the blood spill and went to see what was going on. He found her and took her back to the house. He bit her and put her in the room. She screamed a lot and Carlisle always apologized to her. She soon gave up and stayed silent until she finished with the transformation. They told her what she was, and she was clearly unhappy. She doesn't want this life. Emmett is her husband. She had found him one day when she was hunting by herself. A bear was mauling him and he was practically slaughtered. She ran him back to the Cullens. She didn't think she would be able to make it though, but soon enough she did, and Carlisle turned him as well. Emmett and Rosalie soon fell in love and got married. Though I think their relationship is a little unstable because she would trade their marriage to be human again and that doesn't feel right to me, I stated. That is pretty much all I know about them. They are a very nice family and love each other like they were actually siblings, I finished with a smile.
You said that you had seen us with them. Can you explain some more to me about that?
He asked me finally. I nodded. When we meet them your eyes will be completely golden, and I think it will be late winter to early spring considering the weather when we meet them. I know all of this because this vision is set in stone and nothing changes in it, so I know I am doing everything right so it actually happens, I answered his question.
Do we like it there?
He asked me patiently. Yes, a lot. You and Emmett have an amazing bond and you two act like brothers. All of us get along with each other when we are there. Also, we were. I trailed off because I didn't want to pressure him or make him feel uneasy.
We were what?
He asked as he looked at me with confusion in his eyes. I sighed. We had wedding rings on our left hands, I replied as I looked down. I shouldn't have said anything. Now I don't know if he will want to come with me anymore.
You mean that we, as in you and me, were married when we met them?
He asked with his eyebrows raised and a small smile was on his face. Something about how he said this gave me confidence. I nodded. Yes, we were, I replied as I returned his gaze. I knew he could feel my emotions and I might as well tell him. Since the first day that I had seen you in the vision, I knew that we were made for each other. Now that I have met you, the feeling is even stronger than it was before. I really do love you, I admitted as I looked at him. He was silent for a moment and then he inhaled.
When you had come up to me in the diner, your presence seemed to make me feel better. I think I love you too. I know I love you too,
he said as he looked back at me. I gasped and then smiled at him. I could feel the love coming off of him. I reached my hand up to his cheek. You do mean it, I whispered to him.
Of course I do,
he murmured as he lifted his hand up to mine and engulfed it in his own. Everything was starting to mend into place for me.